This is Big Podcast.
In Nashville.
We're going to get meta on this podcast. This is already a podcast about podcasting, but we're going to go even deeper with an intro about intros. I cracked myself up. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. This is the podcast about growing your podcast, about getting more people to your podcast, about making more money for the advertising and sponsorship that you sell on your podcast. It's about making an impact, doing something that matters. If you are interested in that, you are in the right place. This is the audio edition of my weekly newsletter. That is called Big Podcast Insider. You can find it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189, and this is what I'm covering. An intro about intros. See, there you go. How to pitch your podcast like a Pixar producer. A lot of P's in that. One of those days. How to leverage video on Spotify. What Abraham Lincoln knew about good podcast content. Turn your voice into social media posts and more. Also some classified ads, things that'll help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that people care about, the things that this podcast is about. This episode of Build a Big Podcast brought to you by Riverside.fm, a virtual studio that makes recording and editing at the highest quality possible accessible to anyone. Studio quality recordings, lightning fast editing. You know what's happening right now with Spotify for podcasters. That platform used to have a built-in recording studio. Now they are using Riverside.fm. So maybe you're using it too because you record on Spotify for podcasters. But of course, anybody can use it. It makes recording easy. You give somebody a link. It opens up in the Chrome browser. They are in the Riverside recording studio with you, recording locally, sounding and looking great. If you want to try it, this is how to do it for free. Riverside.fm. Go there right now. Get a free account. That's going to get you a couple of hours. That's enough for a podcast. That's enough for an interview or two. Check it out. See how you like it. If you want to keep it, I've got a discount code for you. Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. That's going to get you 15% off. Riverside.fm. Do try it. Everybody and his brother's using it, so even if you're not recording on it, you need to know how to be a guest on it. So go there now, Riverside.fm, get the free account. And if you do want to stick it out with them, Big Podcast, that's the discount code for 15% off. BIGPODCAST. That's Riverside.fm, the discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. All right, let's get to it. You know how it works. I go from thing to thing to thing, all of them about podcasting, specifically growing your podcast, making a better podcast, making more money with your podcast. So in between those things, you're going to hear this. That's how you know I'm moving on. That's how you know if you want more information, you can go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That's where all the links are. Also, additional details. This is issue number 189. You ready? Let's go. An intro about intros. Just when you thought a podcast about podcasting couldn't fold upon itself and go any deeper, here we are, an intro about intros. I have been playing around on the intros for episodes of this podcast, Build a Big Podcast. I'm going straight into a story now. Maybe notice this in the last, 5 or 6 episodes, even before announcing what the name of the podcast is or what the topic is about. Of course, unless you're skipping it, I do have a tag at the very beginning. This guy.
This is Big Podcast.
People have asked me about this, so since I'm going deep into intros, let me explain about this and why I do it. Specifically, why each one of these intros is different. The guy.
This is Big Podcast.
Always the same, but the music under it, different. That started when this podcast started as a daily podcast. In fact, it was not called Build a Big Podcast. It was called Big Podcast Daily. The issue that I was having wasn't me. It was you, listeners. I was knocking so many of these things out that people were getting confused which episode they had just heard, which episodes they still needed to hear, which episodes they wanted to go back to, pass along. I had to do something different because there's so many of them. So I did 2 things. One, the introductions, the tags. I put different music behind each of them. That way you can make a mental note. Oh, it's this one.
This is Big Podcast.
Not this one.
This is a certified
Big Podcast.
classic.
And the other thing I did, and this still carries on today, the episode art is different. If you were to see big podcast, big podcast, big podcast, big podcast, big podcast in your queue, it's like, oh, which one is this? I got the red one, the green one, the yellow one, the blue one. It's the blue episode that I need. That's the one that I want to go back and listen to. The yellow one, that's the one I want to give to my co-host. That's the reason that I did that. Anyway, back to the intros. Going into stories. That's a way to get listener attention, hopefully your attention. And I say something, oh, okay, I'm going to perk up. I'm curious about what he's saying. I'm looking for examples of people with good intros. Are you one of those people? I hope so. If you've got an intro that grabs listener attention, that makes a listener want to keep listening, that explains your show or your episode in a concise and compelling way, I want you to reach out to me. At the very top of newsletter.bigpodcast.com, this is issue number 189. There is a link for you to send me something that you're proud of. And this is the reason that I want you to do this. I'm working on a new book. I'm looking for examples of intros that I can talk about in this book. I don't believe there are any secrets in podcasting. If something's working, it's going to get out. And if you've got something that's working, let me help you get it out. Let me help you get some credit for it. Get some ears on your podcast so more people can hear what you are doing. If you're interested in that, do let me know. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189. I've got a link for you to reach out to me. Send me a link to your intro. Let me know a little bit more about what you're doing, and we'll go from there. Big Podcast AMP. If you love this newsletter, you're going to love Big Podcast AMP. That stands for Audio Monetization Program. This is a personal coaching program. You're going to work directly with me, and we're going to do 3 things together. 1, grow your podcast audience. 2, get people talking about your podcast. And 3, make more money with your podcast and also your podcasting talents. There are people that will pay you for what a lot of podcasters are doing for free. You want a piece of that? Yeah, let's talk about it. Big Podcast AMP. This is the URL, bigpodcast.com/AMP. bigpodcast.com/AMP. How to pitch your podcast like a Pixar producer. I was in the studio a few months ago. Live radio, multiple people in the studio. And these people had not done radio before, or I'm assuming they haven't. They weren't radio jocks. They were just guests. Community citizens. It was a newscast. So interviewing different people that, again, not a lot of radio experience probably. Not a lot of microphone experience. That was my assumption. So the engineer says, PowerPoint presentation. Can you say that for me? And they would say that. Happy peanut butter. This is a good one too. You want to check for plosives? How to pitch your podcast like a Pixar producer. Let's talk about that. If you've got a podcast, you're pitching it. Maybe not to Pixar, but you're pitching it to listeners, advertisers, family, friends, random strangers, people in the checkout line, other podcasters maybe. I've got a 170-second video. It's going to give you some ideas on how to create a pitch that works. One of the things I will add to this, and this is a great story. You know how Miami Vice was pitched? This is the rumor. MTV Cops. That was it. That is an urban legend. Not true. However, another big series from that time, what pitched it was a fun headline, which was Miami Nice. And that was about the Golden Girls. Got Miami Vice, Miami Nice, a different side of Miami. Not drug running, sweet old ladies. Sometimes all you need is just a few words. And this is one of the things that I love about podcasting. I love taking a 10-minute message and whittling it down so the message is even more effective at 5 minutes than it would have been at 10. Think about this when you're pitching your podcast. If you want to see this 170-second video, speaking of short pitches, go look at it. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189. How to leverage your video on Spotify. Speaking of video, let's talk about your video. You doing a video podcast? If you want to get more listeners and viewers on Spotify, you're going to find this live event that they're doing helpful. Jordan Newman, he's the head of their podcast partner management. He's going to share with you some things to help you create compelling videos and enhance your podcasting brand. This is free. It is worth it if you are doing a video podcast. Even if you are doing audio only, it's going to be worth it to you because you're going to learn some things about how Spotify works, what they're looking for, how to get in the ecosystem of Spotify. Spotify, like them or not, a lot of people listen to podcasts via Spotify. I was blown away. Streaming rather than downloads. It's like, I don't like that. I want to download it when I've got Wi-Fi, take it out wherever I want, not worry about my internet connection, the mobile phone connection. I like a queue. I like seeing all the big podcasts with all the different colors lined up in a row, and I can go through them one by one. Not with Spotify. However, let's not fight it. A lot of people are listening to podcasts via Spotify, especially younger audiences. You want to be part of this. Same for YouTube. We've got to go where the people are if we are going to reach those people. This is a free event. It is worth it for you to take a look at it. How to leverage video via Spotify. I have it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189. What Abraham Lincoln knew about good podcast content. A friend of mine who is a very well-known speaker and doing very well in the speaking business, 20-something grand a pop. He told me about a book called Speak Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln. Maybe something for you if you're interested in getting into the speaking business or just being a better podcast host. I want to talk about something related here, and that's Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It's arguably one of the top speeches of all time. Sean Callahan, he's a storytelling expert, he explains why it works. He basically breaks it down into a 4-part structure. 1, 7 years ago, that's a look back on the past to take the listener back to the way things used to be. That's important. Here's how things were. Here's how things are. The second part, a shift to something that happened. These are events that caused a problem or opportunity. So he takes you back. He says, we've got a problem, but also opportunity. Apparently in Chinese, that's the same word. 3, Callahan calls this the so now. That describes the decision or action that is needed to respond. If we're going to do something about this, fix the problem, or take advantage of the opportunity, we need a decision. That's part 3. And a 4th thing, a look ahead to the future and envisioning of a desired outcome. That's where you motivate people. Get them excited. Change is difficult. Action is difficult. You must motivate people to take action. That's why I like this 4-part structure. I think it's perfect for a podcast. I've got it linked with more information at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189. This is a simple format you can use for both monologue podcast and a framework for the interviews that you do. Do consider it. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189. Turn your voice into social media posts and more. Letterly, this is a mobile app that takes your voice notes, meaning you talk into your phone, and it organizes them into outlines, social media posts, and more. Here's the idea behind Letterly. Very simple. Again, you speak into your mobile phone, and you get the text that you need. You got ideas for a new podcast episode? Speak into it. Questions, outlines, whatever. Speak anything you want into your phone. Let Letterly organize it for you. It's not just another AI-generated text app. They've actually worked with linguists to train the model so that the texts come out in your voice. That's why it's great for social media posts, blog posts, newsletters, whatever you need, man. If you're a speaker, and you are because you're a podcaster, and you want to turn that speech into written content, it is worth looking at. You're going to sound like you wrote it yourself. It is a great tool for podcasters. Right now, lifetime access, only $59. I've got a special link for you, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 189. Classified ads for you, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make more money with your podcast. Podpage, you need a dedicated website for your podcast on your own domain. You can join over 25,000 podcasters who have done just that via Podpage, creating a beautiful listener-friendly podcast site directly from an RSS feed. Meaning, you take the RSS feed from your host, pop it into Podpage, boom, your site is there instantly for you. Yeah, you're going to tweak it, but more or less that heavy lifting is done for you. It is the simplest way to create a great-looking podcast website that's going to be effective, that's going to get more people to listen to your show, more people to subscribe. It's got a great built-in sponsorship page. You're going to be amazed by this. You're going to wonder what took you so long to switch over. You can try it for free with this special link I've got for you, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Cast Magic, automated episode notes. The number one thing that people do not like to do to their podcast, 1, editing. 2, episode notes. I can't help you with editing, but I can help you with the episode notes. Cast Magic will automate these. 35,000 podcasters have used it to automate episode notes, highlight clips, podcast summaries, blog posts, social media posts, and newsletters. You give it your podcast audio, it can generate all of these things. All you do is upload it to Cast Magic, press the button, boom, they're there. All those things that I just mentioned, episode notes, highlight clips, podcast summaries, blog posts, all of it. You can try this for free. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, I want to help you grow your podcast. The best way to work with me is called Big Podcast AMP. That stands for Audio Monetization Program. Personalized coaching for indie podcasters to help you grow your podcast audience and build your authority, brand, and reputation. I have been doing this for years. Before I was in the podcasting business, I was working with radio, musicians, worked with comics, book authors. I worked with people in the entertainment industry for a long time, and I can help you to do this with your podcast, your message, and your related business. Big Podcast Amp audio monetization program, cheaper than you think. It's the quickest and easiest way to personally work with me. This is how to get more info. bigpodcast.com/amp, bigpodcast.com/AMP. And hey, if you're not ready for Big Podcast Amp, let me tell you a couple of other things that I've got for you. Big Podcast Extra, short emails to help you build an audience, attract clients, and make money via podcasting. Also, I've got a podcast growth toolkit for you. The Swiss Army knife of podcasting, that's what I call it. These are templates, contracts, agreements, things that will help you grow your podcast and make the most of the audience that you've got now. All of these things available for you at bigpodcast.com. Go there right now. While you are there, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. That way you never miss an episode. Bigpodcast.com, that's the website. I make it easy for you. One click, iPhone, Android, RSS, whatever you want. I got it for you at bigpodcast.com. Go there now before you forget. And I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.